Hello, welcome to another episode of Hidden History Interviews. I'm your host, John Rodriguez, and in this series, I sit down with authors, podcasters, and content creators and have real conversations about history. Today, I'm joined by historian and content creator Lisa Weakland, although many of you probably know her as Historical USA on Instagram. Lisa also has her own podcast about early American history, but we will get into that and much more in this episode. Before we speak with Lisa, it would be remiss of me not to mention that for those who don't know, I am also the host of Hidden History, an Odyssey Through Time, a history podcast that highlights honorable stories that have been buried deep in the sands of time. Seasons 1 and 2 are available on our website, hiddenhistorypod.com, and all episodes are available wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram at Hidden History Pod. All right, let's get started, and I hope you all enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hidden History Interviews. Today, I am joined by one of my favorite people in the history community, Lisa Weakland of the Historical USA podcast. In addition to her podcast, Lisa has an Instagram account at historical_USA, where she provides historical content for her followers, now over 82,000 followers and growing every day. Lisa also has a YouTube channel where she is the host of History Hour, a series that includes Lisa and a guest talking about a variety of historical topics. I was honored to be a guest on History Hour back in March, and now I'm honored to be interviewing Lisa. Hi, Lisa. I'm so happy to have you here. How you doing today?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, John. I really appreciate it. And thank you for that wonderful intro. I think it definitely made me sound a little more
No, no.
reputable than I probably am.
If the viewers check, everything I said is 100% true. You post historical content, you happen to have a large following, and you're one of my favorite people in the history community. It's all true.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That means a lot, John.
How,
Back
how,
at you.
how
I enjoyed having you on my podcast, and I am more than happy to reciprocate that favor.
Great. I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to have you, and I hope that today our goal is just simply to for the viewers to learn a little bit more about Historical USA, the person behind the Instagram, the person behind the YouTube, and just to learn more about you. Before I jump in, though, you were on some recent trips recently. What was it?
Mhm.
Gettysburg, I believe, in Arizona.
I did. I did an amazing trip. I went to Gettysburg for the first time. It was the
Ah,
160th anniversary, and it was a bucket list trip for me. I have always wanted to go there since I was a little girl after watching, the movie Gettysburg when I
yeah,
was a kid and the Ken Burns documentary on Civil War. It always kind of felt like a really unattainable place for me to go to growing up in Arizona.
yeah,
So it was really rewarding. It was amazing. I've been to battlefields before, and I don't think even going to some of the Civil War battlefields I've been to and some of the Revolutionary War battlefields, there's something really special about Gettysburg. It is one of the most amazing places I've ever been. It was definitely incredibly overwhelming. It's like everywhere you turned, there was another memorial or a monument, or, there was a lot of people I had met whose ancestors were at Gettysburg.
yeah,
So I think that was such a cool experience to hear other people's stories. My family did not fight in the Civil War. Well, I shouldn't say that. My family was in Utah by the time the Civil War broke out. And so we kind of missed that whole engagement. I've got a lot of Revolutionary War family, but it was really cool to kind of see those personal experiences with people, and they were walking the footsteps of some of their ancestors,
mm-hmm.
and kind of reliving a lot of that. There was a lot of reenacting going on.
Oh
So
yeah.
it was an awesome experience. I have had only a few experiences like that, and Gettysburg is definitely up there for sure.
Wow.
And yeah, I have kind of taken a little break for the summer.
Hmm.
With when in regards to the podcast and the YouTube and the Instagram, I think it's kind of good sometimes to take a step back from social media. So,
Hmm. Definitely.
uh, yeah, so July and August, I've kind of taken a little bit of a step back. I went back home to my home state in Arizona, um, and did a little bit of a state history tour. So I've got a few videos coming out about that. Went to the Capitol building and um, did the because each capital in most of the states have a museum.
Yeah.
So I kind of did the Arizona State Capitol Museum and was shocked to see how much of like the USS Arizona is represented there in Phoenix.
Hmm.
They've got the anchor there. They have the ship's silver there. They have a piece of the ship. They have one of the flags that was on the sinking ship there and some other artifacts. So that was really cool.
Hmm.
So I've got a video about that, and then I went to Pleasant Valley, and I've got a video coming about the Pleasant Valley Wars, which was the largest, most deadly family feud in American history. Not the Hatfields and McCoys. I think a lot of people think that that's probably the most deadly. Um, so yeah, a lot of Wild West history. There was one Civil War battle fought in Arizona.
Oh wow.
It was the Battle of Picacho Pass. It was a little skirmish, but it is considered a battle. So I did go to Tucson for a few days. I went up north to Payson for a few days. So yeah, we just kind of like took some time, visited family, and kind of went around Arizona and did some history stuff there. So I've got a couple of videos coming out about that, hopefully within the next couple of weeks.
Great.
But
That
yeah,
sounds that's awesome, and you're right. Sometimes you need to take a break from the social media and especially the topic we cover, the historical topics. Sometimes we get so deep into our research and our work, and it's like, whoa, I need a moment just to refresh a little bit and come back and tackle the project again. I'm sure you deal with that all the time, but
yeah,
it's the summertime. You got the kids at home. Well, the kids are already home because you homeschool, right?
I do homeschool. Yeah.
It's summertime, so yeah, that's great that you got to get out, visit these places, and these are experiences that you have now, and that's awesome. I'm glad to hear all that.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. But I'm ready to get back into it now. So this is a perfect time for you to interview me. So I'm excited for this.
Perfect. Yeah, you had your little break. It's all good, but
Yeah.
the work has to be done, and you certainly do. Between your Instagram and your podcast and your YouTube videos, you do put your work in, and I more than anyone can understand why you need a break. So that you took
Yeah.
your, and now we can move forward, and which leads me right into my first question for you. Just tell the viewers who aren't familiar with you. I hope that most of my viewers are, but if you aren't familiar with Lisa, Lisa will now tell us a little bit about herself.
Okay, well, my name's Lisa. I've run Historical USA now for about, gosh, 4 years. So it was 4 years July. I started the Instagram page July 3rd. Um, and I really kind of started it for me. Um, I'm a stay at home mom. You know, I really love history. I've always been a history buff. It's taken me a few years to get my history degree. And I knew I was going to go back to school, and I felt like I needed to start something, do something to kind of not only just help others, but also kind of educate myself. I had moved to Charleston, South Carolina, from Phoenix, Arizona, and you're just surrounded by so much American history there.
Yeah.
Um, and I realized that I didn't really know a lot about the founding fathers, about the American Revolution, and kind of really the ins and outs on how our own country was formed and that foundation of those ideas. And so I really wanted to kind of start my own project and start exploring that and reading books on that. I've always been a history lover. Um, and my interests had always jumped around.
Yeah.
It was, I was never really focused in one area for very long. I would pick up books about, whatever interests me, from presidential history to World War I, World War II, Vietnam.
Yeah.
I was kind of all over the place. I knew bits and pieces here and there, but I really wanted to kind of start I started with an Instagram account to kind of get to know who the founding fathers were, who
Hmm.
were the men that wrote the Declaration of Independence. There were 52 people that signed it, and I could probably name a handful of them.
Hmm.
So I definitely wanted to do that. So that's kind of where it started. And just over the last 4 years, I mean, my wheelhouse is the American Revolution and the founding era. But
Yeah.
now I kind of do pull archive footage here and there, about what's important and kind of some of those milestones. I started college. I went back to school in 2020,
Oh, okay.
2019, 2020, like
Yeah.
right around before the pandemic. Finished my degree. I graduated a year ago
Oh,
with
great.
my bachelor's in American history. Um, I plan on getting my master's. I'm still working on that. And yeah, so when I graduated and I started going back to college, you go to college, you go back to university, and you take all kinds of different history courses.
Hmm.
So I was taking, ancient Rome. I took a history course on that, and then I took a history course on the Civil War, with a focus on Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, which was really great, because Lincoln's such um an interesting character. He's a little complicated of a character. He didn't write a diary for himself, so his thoughts are very much interpreted by other historians, and
Yeah.
so it was really cool to kind of dive into Lincoln a little bit. I did a lot of um, women's history when it comes to war. I do focus a lot on military history, which is weird for a female. I mean, I'm definitely maybe one of a few female historians that do have an emphasis on military history. And so I get, messages all the time. How did you, get into this? I'm a military spouse, so I live on a military base. I've lived on military bases. My dad's a veteran, works with veterans. So the military's always been something that I've been interested in. So not only do I like do the founding fathers, but I also have a focus in military history as well. But when I was in college, I really wanted to explore women in war. So I've written papers and on uh, uh, Deborah Sampson and Anna Marie Lane. These are women that fought in the Revolutionary War, either disguised as men or alongside their husbands.
Yeah.
Not camp followers. These are women that actually put on the uniform, were scouts, were artillery. They were fighting alongside the men. I actually have a video coming out from that will come out soon, but it's on the forgotten women of Pickett's charge, because there are actually 5 Confederate women that were found out as casualties of that charge at
Wow.
Gettysburg, which a lot of people don't know that. And honestly, I stumbled on that when I was doing research on Pickett's charge, and I was looking at General Hayes and some of his battlefield notes in his reporting, and had mentioned that they had found a dead female Confederate soldier.
Wow.
So, so that really kind of piqued my interest. So I do hop around a little bit. So
Yeah.
if you do follow me on Historical USA, if you are one of my earlier followers, you've seen it's kind of evolved. But I would still say that 18th century America is still my wheelhouse as far as where my studies are focused,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I think a lot of us, for the most part, we jump around, per se. Like,
Yeah.
unless you're one of those historians that just happens to have a specialty. You're focused on one topic in history, which is perfectly fine. Then that's you. But a lot of us, like as you see on my page, I could post one thing about the Holocaust, and then my next post is a post from the 1800s. So it's
Yeah.
like you, I too jump around a lot. So I get that, but
Yeah.
history, it's there's a lot of interesting things that happen. So sometimes the jumping around is necessary.
Yeah, and I think history also is never ending, so I will post I very rarely post current events, but I will if I feel like it's, something that is going to be studied, as a historian, I can tell this is going to be a landmark, whether it's a landmark decision with the Supreme Court for
Yeah.
Roe v. Wade, or, whether it's an election or anything like that. So I will post some current events if I do think that it's going to hit that history mark, that this is going to be something that our kids are going to learn about in the future. And there's been a lot of those lately. So I do hit some current events here, some pretty big ones, but not usually. But if it's a big enough one, I will.
Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, sometimes it's good to tie in current events with events of the past because it helps some people actually learn more. If you learn from events of the past, it helps you understand why certain things might happen today, or how could certain things happen today. It's like, well, because maybe 100 years ago they were doing it that way as well, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, we're all over the place as historians. I for one feel I know I am, and but for the most part, you're mainly focused on the founding of America, the
Yeah.
founding fathers and such. Now, was it this in the beginning? Was it the lack of knowledge about the fathers and early America that led you ultimately to start your podcast, Historical USA?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think for me it was that summer 2019, even into 2020, we saw a lot of monuments starting to come down,
Mm-hmm.
and you can debate back and forth whether that was the right thing to do or not. But it seemed to have been a trend on, who we're re-examining who gets our attention historically nowadays. And when I saw Abraham Lincoln's statue coming down in Boston, or Thomas Jefferson's statue um, being removed from New York's town hall, I kind of felt like I think we need to re-examine who the founders were and really uncover who these men are and what they did, and not paint them all with the same brush. Because, I mean, the founding of America was pretty contentious. I wouldn't say their issues were a little different, but I think there was also some kind of polarization going on. And I think if we examine that and we examine who these men were, then we'll find that they dealt with a lot of heavy issues as well
Yeah.
that we're dealing with today. Maybe, not necessarily socially the exact same, but in their day, I mean, they were going to start a revolution. And, that takes a lot of courage, and revolutions, 9 times out of 10, they fail.
Yeah.
They fail, and this is a group of people, the English colonies, that were going up against a Goliath. This is Britannia, rule Britannia. This was the biggest, largest empire of the day, and these, farmers, militias were doing this incredible experiment on enlightened ideas, and these philosophical ideas that had never been tested before. And I think that the outcome is incredibly astounding.
Mm.
And, there's a reason our Constitution, you know, and I know people debate this back and forth, but there is a reason that our Constitution is still our governing document today and has lasted 250 plus years. And we are the only, it's the only constitution that has survived those early conflicts,
Yeah,
those
yeah,
earlier revolutions. We're still kicking. It's the oldest document still governing, oldest democracy and constitution
yeah.
still directing our government today.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but it works. It clearly works because, like you said, it's still being used to this day. Are there problems? Of course, which is why we, have ratification of amendments and adding new amendments and removing amendments because it's not perfect, of course. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy, just a crazy world. Sometimes I just think about the world and. But I think that's one reason I'm drawn to history. It's like you think you look at certain things in history, and then you look at how things are today, and it's like, I've seen this before. Where have I seen this before? Like with certain things, it's mind boggling sometimes. But anyway, that's a conversation probably for a whole nother on that. But so tell the viewers just what exactly is historic. I mean, I think you've touched on it enough, but just to clarify, historical your podcast, Historical USA, you cover the different events in early America.
Yeah, so Historical USA it's Historical USA Road to Revolution season 1. So this first season, we are I really, like I said, I wanted to, this is kind of my pet project. This is something I wanted to do for a very long time. I finally have the time and energy to do it.
Yeah,
But the podcast is really a historical narrative of the United States. The first episode, we discuss the social movements that are going on in the colonies. This is the colonial period. How do we go from, these small little settlements into a cities and states and these big colonies? How do we evolve in those 150 years from the Pilgrims landing and the settling of Jamestown and the signing of Declaration of Independence? It's incredible to think about the concept of time, I think, because when you think of the Pilgrims, you think, okay, then we signed the Declaration of Independence, a couple of decades later, but it was well over a century.
yeah,
And so there's a lot of history that causes us to evolve. There's a lot of conflict going on. I always say the colonial period, more than any other period to me, and you could probably say, anciently, but in this modern history, is probably the most deadly, most chaotic, most dog eat dog world. North America was a battle zone for about 100 years, much like Europe, but North America, these colonists had to learn how to survive and fight to survive. And there is a lot of, there's the Spanish and the French and even the natives, the Iroquois and the Cherokee, and these great nations, these First Nations that the Europeans and the English are dealing with, and the Spanish are dealing with, and the French are dealing with, and there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of treaties being made and treaties being broken. And I really kind of wanted to dig into that and kind of understand how the culture was being formed to allow for a Declaration of Independence, to allow for that to come to fruition. So that this whole first season is setting up the economic, social, cultural understanding of how we get to a place where a revolution has to happen. Because
mm,
I think, when you're in school, you go, okay, well, if you have a good history teacher, they
mm,
might teach you, you're going to learn about the Pilgrims around Thanksgiving. You're going to learn about those guys. You might touch on Jamestown if you watch Pocahontas.
yeah,
You're not going to really learn about that in if you have a really good teacher, and I don't want to knock teachers because they have a small time to get
Mhm.
so much history in there.
Yeah.
But if you have a really good teacher, they'll talk about the French and Indian War. And, they'll do maybe a class on the Sons of Liberty and the Boston Tea Party. And boom, you're in the revolution. The revolution happens. You sign the Declaration of Independence. Okay, Shays Rebellion. There go the articles. Here's the Constitution. We just covered a month of school. It's just like you don't really get the opportunity to do those deep dives. And so this podcast for me is an opportunity not only for myself to kind of get in there, do the research. We talk about King Philip's War. We talk about the Pequot War. We talk about King William's War. We talk about Queen Anne's War. I mean, these are things you don't even hear in university if you're studying, American history. So we really did dive deep in there. The next episode that is coming out is going to be all about young George Washington and those early failures and how he ends up starting the First World War, essentially the 7 Years' War, with the death of, with the accidental killing of Germanville. For those that know what I'm talking about. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll have to tune in.
Yeah, exactly. You got to tune in to see what happens to. It's all very interesting. I'm a big fan because it's like it's basically what you said. It's like this. We learn about it. It didn't just happen. Boom. We want freedom. Boom. Here's the Declaration. Boom. We're the United States. There are all those years that led up to these people saying enough is enough. There's all those
Yeah.
years of us living here in this country before we were even truly upset with the British, and we were actually happy with them, and we had no problems, and we just had to worry, about other things on this land. But it's you do a deep dive into the into early American history that is crucial to understand. It's very important to understand because it allows you to understand these people when they decide we want our freedom from Britain, we want to be our own independent country. At that point, you're like, oh, I get it now. I get why these colonists want their freedom. It's not like just boom, we want our freedom. And because then people start, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, the colonists were, what is the word, inconsiderate,
We're
complaining.
traitors.
Yeah, it's like
Traitors.
if you look at it, real quick from the outside, it's like, yeah, these guys seem like, they're not. They should be grateful to Britain, this big, powerful country. Let them live on this in this new world and blah blah blah. But when you know the details, then it's a different story. And your podcast is great because you give all of these little details. Just for example, you brought up a young George Washington. It allows people. It will allow people to learn that before he was the first president of this nation, he was just a man. He was just a guy. He was, a young man making his way through life like all of us, and he wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
None of us are perfect.
Well, I think for me, you hear a lot of, especially politicians, invoke the founders and their wisdom. And it's like wisdom comes from learning.
Hmm.
And what did our founding fathers learn? Why did they get to that point? And I think it's important to understand where that wisdom comes from
Yep.
and why that we still look to them, in this modern age. We still, even though I know that some people wish we didn't, but they did have a lot of really, they learned a lot of the lessons that I think we are now learning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
relearning, we've forgotten and we're seeing them again, and we're seeing the yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to get, too into it, but yeah, I think we're kind of seeing a pattern here, and we can learn a lot from what they went through.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And it's basically learning through wisdom. You have to learn through the experience first. All the
Hmm.
experience builds true wisdom, and that's the number one way to learn it. Learn about the experiences of these people and what they went through.
Yeah.
Uh, Once the viewers get through this early narrative of of America, all these experiences, cultural, society, everything leading up to the Declaration of Independence. What is once they're done through going through all that, this whole first season? What is the number one lesson you hope your audience will learn by listening to your podcast?
That these men, these first Americans are not as different as you and I. That their struggles may not be as different as we think that they are. Um, the social um, the other thing I also kind of hope that people understand is history is not as black and white as I think sometimes we want to paint it out as.
Mhm.
So I hope they get a better understanding of the type of people that were living at that time. I just did an entire two-part series on slavery. Um, we're There's a historian, Ira Berlin. He kind of classifies about three different points of um, history within slavery itself. So this first one was all about the charter generations of slavery. How did slavery evolve in the 150 years before we became a country? The next season is kind of the um, those post-war years, War of 1812, leading up to the Civil War, and I'll talk about uh, the plantation generations of slavery is what it's called. So how that kind of changes. I think today is the anniversary of Nat Turner's rebellion.
Hmm.
Um, so the last episode we talked about Stonewall Rebellion. So for me, I don't want to hide any history. Everything's out there. It's not, I'm not trying to craft a certain point of view because believe me, I think a lot of people were upset about, what I had to say in the last couple episodes. Um, and I'm not trying to hide truth. If you don't like what the truth of it is, then you're more than welcome to refute me. But I really wanted to make sure that when I was doing this podcast that I was true to the history of what the subject was. I could paint George Washington as a hero, but the fact of the matter is, he was a failure. His early military career was a failure. On paper, I mean, he didn't win any battles. you know, he's there at Braddock's defeat. The guy could have given up
Yeah.
again and again and again, and he had no reason, after losing to be out there, but he kept persevering, and I think that is a lesson in leadership. And so, if I tried to paint him a very romanticized way, it wouldn't work. And so for me, it's this podcast is me as a historian kind of stretching my legs and showing you, this is I come with facts, and I'm trying my best to lay it out there for you the way that it's been laid out. Um, Now, I will say, as a historian, it is difficult, I think, to kind of hide some of your biases. We all have different perspectives and worldviews.
Yeah.
So I would never say that I don't think that someone else's criticism isn't valid or unwanted. I think we all have different experiences in life. Um, I think that two truths can be I think there that two perspectives can be true at the same time. So I hope to give a more well-rounded view of history because I do want to show as many different perspectives of something as I can.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the most important thing. That's one of the most important things about the study of history or teaching history. It's there's good and bad in history. That's as long as you accept that as number one thing, you can get past almost anything. It's like, yeah, George Washington was the first president. That's a good thing. but he owned slaves. That's a bad thing. There's going to be good and bad. The point, as long as people are presented the good and the bad, then they could take it and do what they want with it. But it's important for us, like you and I and so many others, just to simply put it out there. Just put out the without trying to let our own biases get too mixed into it. We just simply put out the facts as they are, and
Hmm.
that's simply what it is to share history, to teach history. It's because it's already there. It's like we
Yeah.
find stuff all the time in history, like hidden this and that, but for the most part, it's there and done, and we just have to, pass on that information. You know,
Yeah.
that's all it really is. Of course, people twist it. There are people who can twist their versions of history, twist people in history, which would probably lead into my next question. This is connected to historical revisionism. For the viewers, and before I continue, before I even go on, I urge all the viewers to please check out Lisa's podcast if you're interested in learning more about early American history and beyond, because she's only beginning. She's only beginning. Going to continue on all the way up to the 1900s, or hopefully. But to
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Who knows?
we'll see. We'll see where you go with it. But I urge all my viewers to please check it out if you're interested. And thank you. From there, we'll talk about historical revisionism because you have brought up perspectives about history. For the viewers now, in general, historical revisionism refers to the reexamination of accepted historical narratives or the introduction of new perspectives on history. This can be done for a variety of reasons, such as to challenge dominant interpretations, to fill in gaps in the historical record, or to correct errors. Some
Hmm.
argue that it is an essential part of the historical process, allowing us to constantly refine our understanding of the past. Others contend that it can be used to distort history for political gain. Now, what are your thoughts, Lisa, on historical revisionism, just in general? Because you had mentioned before, the statues, the tearing down of the statues, which is exactly what historical revisionism is. So, I'd just like to hear a little bit of what you think about it.
So I think that it is good to go back and re-examine. I think that is something that we as historians, that is our job to do. I think that there is good things to re-examine. For me, I did a deep dive into slavery. I think that we as a society in this country are very uneducated about the origins of slavery. So I really wanted to do that episode and do those two episodes very, very heavily researched, and hopefully very clearly put, because I do think that is something that we have watered down. It has been something we have been scared to teach, I think, in the last 50 years, just because it is a very sensitive subject and it's one that we're still fighting over.
Yeah,
So, I can understand that, but I think things like the 1619 project, which was not reputable, and I think that's been proven now that was not a reputable source, first of all, and many of the historians that worked on that have refuted it. So when you have things like that coming out, I think that does a huge disservice to us as a nation and a society, because it doesn't tell the whole truth. It creates and crafts a narrative that I think is damaging to us as a nation. Um, but I do think it is really important that we examine history, like, for instance, the lost cause narrative, of the last, 20th century. I think we need to really re-examine what that was and what that meant. I'm not saying, that that the South shouldn't be proud of their ancestors that fought in the Confederacy, because I also think that that is something that we need to re-examine as well. The majority of those men that were fighting, who were they fighting? You know, why were they fighting? Many of them didn't own slaves, but I think it also kind of shows that, you know, it's the king that starts the battles.
Hmm.
So I think I think we need to re-examine that as well, and maybe not um, look at it so harshly to those that have had fought and supported their home state. Um, so yeah, I think that historical revisionism is kind of a slippery slope. I think that we should constantly be re-examining, and I think that we should constantly be looking at history, and we are uncovering evidence of new perspectives, new things through history all the time. And so I think that, but when it comes to crafting a narrative like the Lost Cause or like the 1619 Project, I think that does us a huge disservice. And I think that we as historians have a responsibility to make sure that what we are putting out there and what we are looking at and examining at is done reputably, that
Hmm.
we are checking our sources, checking our facts, making sure that, you know, what we're looking at is not being completely misinterpreted and twisted and skewed. And I think for me that's one of also one of the reasons why I started the podcast, is because I do see a lot of historical revisionism happening when it comes to the founding of America. And for me, it was important, not just for me as myself, but I think for anyone, to kind of go back and really let's deep dive into what people are claiming about what the founding really was. And I think it's really important that we study that and we understand that.
Yeah.
And so that for me, you know, I think that, like I said, I think historical revisionism, I think going back and re-examining certain historical aspects is necessary, is important, but I think that we have to do it from a place where we're not using it and twisting it for our own, whether it's political or ideological narratives.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we have to make sure that we don't try to erase certain things, certain
Yeah.
that happen in history, because you can't erase it. It happened, you know, whether it was good or bad. Let's just focus on the bad, because that's what most people focus on, anyways. Slavery, it happened. We can't change that. There's no time machines. All we can.
We are not a nation of gods. We are a nation of men, and men are deeply flawed.
Mhm.
And so there are going to be deeply flawed. It's like I say, you know, my favorite thing, I also really like the infamous. I'm really interested in the scandals and the corruptions. I mean, listen, I love history. History is nothing but drama, okay? It is the ultimate drama. And so for me, it's like, you know, I love the Reconstruction period. The political class is probably the most corrupt in American history during that time. Tammany Hall, the New Age, the new half breed Republicans. That political era is has today's politics don't
Mhm.
even hold a freaking candle to what kind of corruption was going on during, you know, the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. So for me, it's like I wish people would look at history more, because I think it would also help us to mellow out a little more as a society and take a breath and say, okay, these people got through it, we'll get through it too, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, yeah. I like to believe that these different experiences in history, they can be they're just a learning experience for us now in some way. Not all, but a lot of circumstances, situations that have happened in the past, we can learn from today, and that's important. Which is why history is an important topic to study because it's important to know your history, whether it's about your own country or about even yourself. You want to know, your own history, or your that gets into genealogy and all that. It's just like it's important just to know, because when you know more, you're more informed, and then when you're more informed, knowledge is the true power. Even though it might
Yeah.
seem corny to a lot of people, the fact of the matter is, for hundreds and thousands of years, people have known that knowledge. You could have a sword and a gun, but knowledge is what truly makes you, powerful.
You cannot learn anything without knowing the history. You
Yeah,
can't. You can't learn math. You can't learn science. You can't. Someone had to figure all of that out before you.
yeah,
Unless you're, Elon Musk, or you're doing these things that no one's ever done before, or an Oppenheimer or some crazy genius. You're gonna learn the history of math. You're gonna learn the history of science. You're gonna learn the history of even pop culture. It's hilarious to me. I see on TikTok all these TikTok creators are talking about the Kardashians and the Hilton, or Paris Hilton, or whoever, and it's like, let's do a deep dive on the relationship of Kanye and Kim Kardashian. Well, you're essentially just looking into the history of the Kardashians or Taylor Swift. I mean, essentially that's really what you're doing. And so for us to understand something, you do learn the history. There's history of everything. You're going to learn the history of something.
yeah, yeah, exactly. There's history and everything, and there's history and everything, and that's what leads me into my next question. And the next two questions, I was actually asked the following two questions when I was interviewed by the makeup historian Sarah Long, and I thought they were great questions, so I borrowed them from her for this interview. I hope she doesn't
Okay.
mind that. But for those of you watching who are interested, you can find Sarah on Instagram at the makeup historian. Now the question here is, how can historians counteract fake historical narratives and promote historical accuracy in the digital realm? Now, you did touch on this briefly when you said you mentioned about sources, but do you have anything further to add about how we can promote historical accuracy, especially in this everything's online now?
I think for me, it's more like I've got my podcast. I'll do videos on certain things. Um, I think really it's just educating your audience. I share what books I'm reading.
Yeah,
I share my sources with people. I do my podcast. My podcast always comes with a cited source list on my website.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, that is something that is difficult
yeah,
to counteract, because I I mean, I've also kind of thought about doing a refuting thing, but so for me it's difficult because I think the internet already is super toxic,
mhm,
and I have seen other creators kind of make their entire page about one upping, or calling another creator out, and that's not something that I personally want to do. I don't think that benefits anyone.
yeah,
So, you know, when it comes to combating fake narratives, I just want to make sure that my reputation as a historian is out there, that I'm doing what I can do to properly inform people and make sure that I am crediting my source as well. I try to do that as much as possible. Now, if I do an edit of a video, where it's cutting a clip, or, whatever, it's hard to do that in short form,
yeah,
which I think is where a lot of like the misinformation comes from. And, I've had people send me videos about, Andrew Jackson being the first black president, or just things that are kind of like that
yeah.
outlandish. Or I've had to explain, how George Washington really is our first president, and that the nine people before him are kind of more like the Speaker of the House. So I've had to do my best to try and explain those things when they go viral. And I'm glad that people know and have so much trust in me that they can send me those videos and go, "What do you think? What are your thoughts on this?"
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
So I think that that's our responsibility is just make sure you're not, we all know. Okay, let's be honest though. I mean, we all know kind of when something is not 100%. Like we're like, wait a second, whether it's on a
Yeah.
podcast or something like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's I guess the number one message for future historians would be your sources. Always
mhm.
source and make sure they're legitimate sources. And because some sources could be wrong and you don't even realize it. You use a source, it's a legitimate good one, and then you later find out, oh crap, this is not a great source at all. You simply you edit it. You let people know you made a mistake, and that's it. You move forward.
Yeah,
And kids, Wikipedia can be edited, so not all information is accurate on Wikipedia. I just want to put that
yeah.
out. Uh,
And that's another thing too. I mean, and that's the other thing is I was just talking to JD from the History Underground about this too. A source that I might use might not be as reputable as we thought it once was.
mhm,
So, you know, and there was a lot of that going on, especially in the early 20th century.
yeah,
There was a lot of right around World War One, a call for patriotism. So a lot of things were kind of romanticized and elaborated, and legends kind of became fact, and so there is that. And I have done a few videos on George Washington didn't really cut the cherry tree down, and Betsy Ross probably did not sew the first American flag. That's
yeah,
kind of a rumor started by her grandson. So yeah, there's stuff like that, and we as historians, you should be open to being corrected.
mhm,
That is the whole reason, when whether you're in an academic setting or not, you should have an open dialogue, to receive knowledge just as much as you give knowledge as well.
yeah,
But you need to do your research, and I do think that there is a lot of misinformation, and that's kind of on you not to just take a TikTok for its word. So,
yeah,
you know, you got
yeah,
to use some discernment here. I think that's a word that we lack a lot. There, you need to kind of use a little bit of your gut instinct on whether you think something is true. Unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at.
yeah, yeah. That is basically where we're at. But yeah, it's right. You're right, and it's true. Uh, it's just it's a lot of things, It's just you were saying about being corrected, and that is very important, especially when if you're someone who doesn't like to be corrected, and then you now have to get used to being corrected. It's like it's for your own benefit. Remember that, guys. When you're feeling down, you're like, oh crap, who this person to tell me it's for your own good. And I've learned that the hard way. And now when people correct me, if I make a mistake on a post or whatever, I say thank you. I check the information that they provided me. I make sure it's legitimate, and then I say thank you, and I change it in my post or whatever, and go by.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and and honestly, that's my favorite thing is I have followers that they know their stuff. I have other historians that follow me, and I love when I don't like being corrected, but if they add something or they clarify something, that's like my favorite thing ever.
yeah,
I did a post about Longstreet a few weeks ago, and my you only get a few couple hundred words on Instagram, and not everything I wanted to put in there I could put in the post, but man, my followers, they just came with a wealth of information, and it just blew me away. That is my favorite thing about doing historical USA is the followers that add so much depth to a post or add so much to the thing that I'm doing. That blows me away. How lucky I am to have followers that are also willing to teach, which is really cool, and share their knowledge. And I love that. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And what another thing to add to that is I love when a follower simply says, "Thank you for sharing this. I learned something."
Yeah.
It's like because that's the ultimate goal. I think for all of us is at the end of the day, whether we're putting up a YouTube video as historians, whether we're putting up a YouTube video or a post or a reel, we just want to share some knowledge that we have with the world. And when we get
Mhm.
that back from somebody that says, "Thanks for sharing this. I never knew about this," or "Wow, this is an amazing picture. Thank you for sharing this." It's like you touch somebody's life in that moment, and it's a nice feeling. And because at the end of the day, what we do is we're teaching others what knowledge we possess, and that leads me into my next question about teaching in a digital world, a digital format. What do you believe, Lisa, are the benefits and drawbacks of teaching history in a digital format?
Um, for me, I love it. I think that's where we're headed anyways. I mean, I really do. I think that more and more especially pre-pandemic, the world is digital.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's pretty cool how you can reach people in other parts of the country or other parts of the world with
Yeah.
what I have to say or what I'm teaching. So yeah, I think it has definitely. I will say, I think that the days of the David McCulloughs, the Shelby Foots. I think if you are a historian, you need to be on the digital space.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can still write books, but um, you need to brand yourself as a historian. Which I hate saying that, but just in digital marketing, that you have to build yourself up, right? In the digital space as a
Mm-hmm.
reputable historian. Now, unless you're going to go into the academic space and be a professor and all that, that's great. But I think it's important that you do a little bit of branding
Mm-hmm.
and marketing yourself as a historian and as a reputable historian. So yeah, I think that the digital space has not only changed how historians operate, how history is shared, but just about everything. Just about everything.
Yeah.
From retail to, commentary, political commentary, funny
Mm-hmm.
videos. I mean, the digital world is so big now that
Yeah.
I think if you are a historian and you want to share your, authors are going on people's podcasts now. It's
Mm-hmm.
no longer the C-SPAN interview book of the week. It's they're finding other podcasts. I've had authors reach out to me, "Can I be on your podcast to promote my book?" You
Yeah.
know. So I think that yeah, the world is online and it's no longer, the History Channel. It is the History Underground, vlogging through history, hidden history podcast. That's where people are going. That's where you need to be if you want to share your history. You have to be in the digital space.
Yeah, yeah, you're 100% correct. It's a digital world we live in now. It- it's certainly different than 20 years ago. Imagine. I think
Yeah.
some. I think about it sometimes. 20 years ago, I was 14 years old, and I think about life when I was 14 and how it really was even like when I like learning, education. At 14, I didn't have the resources I have now that I can look online and find almost anything. Back then, it was a lot different, and
Yeah.
it's a different world we live in. And so that would lead me to my final question, which, since I'm talking about the world, how has your work as a historian affected the way you view the world? I guess in the way you view the world, just in general. Because I know, for example, for myself, as I gotten deeper into when I started getting deeper into my Holocaust studies, for example, uh, after I got into that and then I came home from Poland, I just looked at everything different because of those experiences that I had learned about and et cetera. But I'll just I'll let you talk now. How does it affect the way you view the world?
Um, it really hasn't. I unapologetically have a Christian worldview.
Mm,
And so for me, everything is centered around Christ.
gotcha.
But I will say it really has opened my eyes more and more to the understanding that these people aren't as different as we think that they are, we thought that they were. I think it just shows that human nature does not change.
Yeah.
And that probably is the biggest realization. There is nothing new under the sun. It's like my favorite quote from Mark Twain: history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Mm,
There isn't one thing that has happened in the last 20 years that you cannot learn or understand how to handle that from history. Okay, whether it is a presidential election going awry, whether it, I mean, hello,
yeah.
President Hayes had to be inaugurated in a private inauguration because people wanted to kill him. Isn't that crazy? General President Grant had to shut Washington down. It's just, I think that we just are so, you know, everything that's happening to us has never happened before.
Mm,
And, the struggles might be different, but that they're essentially the same in a
yeah.
lot of ways. In a lot of ways. People have been oppressed, people have been disenfranchised, people have gone through war and famine and all kinds of strife and oppression. And I think for me, it's comforting in the fact that as scary as the future is, I know that mankind and humanity does continue and there is going to be good and there are always better days ahead. And, for me, it helps me, history, to reconcile the world that I live in now,
Mm,
and that gives me a lot of comfort.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's just me. When I hear people talk about oh, we're headed for a civil war, I'm like, wait a second, that's I mean, if you look back, we're about
Hmm.
this has happened before. Let's go
Yeah.
to re-examine what's going on there. So for me, it just helps me kind of look at the world today and find comfort that a lot of this is rhyming from the world's the days of the past.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That's all it is at the end of the day. It's just, it's whatever we're dealing with, it's been dealt with in some way, shape, or form. It's just we have the knowledge for the most part because we're historians to know that okay, this has happened in this way whatever years ago, so we'll get through this now because we as a people have been through this before and yeah, history is a wonderful thing, a wonderful topic.
Mhm.
Bonus question for you before we go, Lisa. Your top three presidents. I couldn't make you pick just one because I know that's very hard. And I'm not going to make you pick an order because that's not fair either. But if you could just tell the viewers, who are your top three U.S. presidents?
My top three U.S. presidents. Well, my favorite president is Garfield, President James Garfield. Uh, my and if you have followed me, I've given several reasons why. I think he is America's biggest what if. What
Hmm.
if he hadn't died in office? I think it would have ushered in a civil rights movement 50 years before, the 1960s. But I would say so. Garfield is my favorite. I think he has the most amazing Cinderella story in political history.
Okay.
and I can recommend several books. Dark Horse, Destiny of the Republic by Candace Millard is a fabulous one. Another Teddy Roosevelt would probably be second for me. And and I always say this, and I think people get a little taken aback. For me, I look at these presidents as a cast of characters now.
Hmm.
What they did was so important, but I like that their quirkiness. I like their personalities. I think that their personal histories are also something worth examining, not necessarily were they a successful president or a failure of a president. So for me, it would be Garfield, Teddy Roosevelt. And then the third one, I mean, I think it would shock everyone that Washington and
Link.
Lincoln are not anywhere near my top five. But I would say that my third favorite one would probably be a tie, to be honest, between some of the most infamous presidents we've had, like Jackson and Jefferson. I would say that it would be a tie between those two.
Okay.
Um, I also really like Reagan and Eisenhower, and yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
It's tough to pick just three. I get that, but I knew that you wouldn't go with the usual answers of Washington, so that my viewers can hear some other options, because everyone's used to, and not to take anything away from George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, both great.
I will say, John, I think right now my favorite thing is examining presidential relationships, just because I think that where we're at now with, Biden and Trump and,
Hmm.
Obama and McCain, or Obama and Mitt Romney, I think it's really interesting how now everyone's talking about the peaceful transfer of power, but I'm like,
Hmm.
remember Andrew Jackson became president, and what did John Quincy do? He went and became the Speaker of the House. Like, what? Everyone kind of forgets that these are men too, and they also have feelings, and they've caused a bit of drama and controversy in the last 200 and something years. So
Hmm.
I find those kind of things a little ironic and funny. Um,
Yeah.
and so for me, I love that whole drama between Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, and how chaotic that whole time period was.
Yeah. Very.
It it was so chaotic. I mean, I just think it was hilarious. And you go back, like, if you Google political cartoons of Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams, and like the Federalists and the, Democrats, and how they're literally polarizing the country, it's just, I mean, it's so ironic to me. And
Yeah.
I love that. I love that kind of stuff. So that relationship between those two men right now, I have been reading a lot about, and it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
President
I
Obama is the.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. Politics is a very personal business,
Yeah.
and I love studying the history of politics. So if I was not doing, the founding fathers and the Revolutionary War, I would definitely do that. And I have done a few videos on like Boss Tweed and
Yeah.
Tammany Hall and Bosco Garfield, and how he, got the nomination kind of out of nowhere. Those kind of political stories. I love that kind of stuff too. History is like, you cannot write a better script than what history has already written for you.
Yeah.
And so that's like, I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all there for us to soak up and learn, and literally you can learn something new every day. I know
Hmm.
things every day. I learn at least one thing new, whether it's Holocaust history or World War I history or whatever. I learn one new thing every day just from my work, from my research, from and I hope that our conversation inspires others to go out there and maybe get into history, or check out your podcast, learn about early American history. Maybe check out my podcast, learn a couple. Um, but Lisa, I want to thank you for this. This has been a great conversation, and I'm honored that you joined me here tonight, and we were able to have this discussion. And now the only thing left to do is for you to look into that camera there, and you let all the viewers know where they can find you on Instagram, on YouTube, and if you have anything coming out, any future projects, now's the time. Just let the viewers know.
Yes, so you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, historical_USA. Um, I'm on YouTube as Historical USA. I've got the podcast Historical USA Road to Revolution. That comes out every other week in tandem with History Hour, which is kind of like this, where we talk with other history content creators, authors, and historians, and have just a conversation about history. And then I also started a series called Historical USA Road Trip. So the next vlog, I know it's been a while, but me taking a break these last 2 months. Gettysburg Vlog 3 is coming out. We're going to be talking about Seminary Ridge, the Peach Orchard, the wheat field, my favorite general, and the most controversial and infamous general of Gettysburg, which is not Longstreet, but Dan Sickles, the self-imposed hero of Gettysburg. So we're going to talk about that, and then I've got a few more videos on Gettysburg and a couple videos about some Arizona history, and yeah, so lots of things coming. So just take a look out, keep a watchful eye.
Yeah.
I'm doing the best I can, editing as much as I can these days.
Yeah, you have a lot of, and you still manage to get all this content out there and plan future content. So
Yeah.
I'll be putting links below for Lisa's Instagram, her YouTube, all the other links, everything. You can find Lisa everywhere, and those will all be included below. And again, Lisa, thank you for this.
Thank you
I'm
for
glad
having
to
me.
talk, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I hope we can speak again soon. And thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, I'm John Rodriguez, and this has been Hidden History Interviews. Good night, everyone.